Here is a fact that should not be possible. Take an entire nation, a country of millions, and almost every single person in it answers to one of fewer than 100 surnames. Not a village, not a valley. The whole country. At one point, under 100 names covered around 90% of the population of Wales. 10 names alone covered more than half of everyone. There is no other country in Europe that folds its people into so few names, and once you understand why, you will never hear the name Jones the same way again. Because if your surname is Welsh, it is almost certainly not really a family name at all. It is a frozen accident, a fragment of a sentence that stopped mid-thought about 500 years ago, and hidden inside it, in many cases, is a single tiny word that tells you exactly what your name used to mean. By the end of this, you will be able to look at your own surname and see the ghost of the ancestor buried inside it. But to understand why half of Wales shares 10 names, you have to understand what the Welsh did before surnames existed at all, because for most of their history, they simply did not have them. For centuries, the Welsh named themselves with a system that was alive, that changed with every generation, and it worked like a chain. A man was not given a fixed family name that he passed down. Instead, he was known as the son of his father. The Welsh word for son is mab, and worn down in speech it became ap, or before a vowel, ab. So a man named Dafydd, whose father was Owen, was Dafydd ap Owen, David's son of Owen. And his son Rhys would not be an Owen or a Dafydd. He would be Rhys ap Dafydd, Rhys son of David. The name shifted every single generation, following the bloodline like a thread. For daughters, the word was Ferch, meaning daughter of, so a woman might be Gwenllian Ferch Gruffhood, Gwenllian daughter of Gruffhood. And the proud, the powerful, the men who wanted to show off a long and noble line, did not stop at one link. They would recite the whole chain. A chieftain might be known as Llywelyn ap Gruffhood ap Madog ap Iorwerth, reeling off 4 generations of fathers in a single breath, a spoken family tree you carried in your own name. This was not a limited pool of surnames. It was the opposite. It was endlessly flexible, and it stretched back through the centuries in a living recitation of who made whom. So how did a nation with infinitely flexible names end up crushed down into a handful of Joneses? For that, you need a date and a villain. And it is the same villain your bloodline keeps running into. England. In the year 1536, King Henry VIII passed what became known as the Act of Union, which folded Wales formally into the Kingdom of England. And one of its quiet demands changed Welsh identity forever. All official business, all law, all administration would now be conducted in English, and the English state could not cope with the Welsh way of naming. English clerks, English courts, and English tax collectors needed something they understood, a fixed surname, one name that stayed the same from a man to his son to his grandson, the way English names did. The flowing Welsh chain, changing every generation, was administrative chaos to them. And so, slowly, under the weight of English record-keeping, the Welsh were pushed to freeze their names, to pick one link in that ancient chain and stop it dead. To take the name of one father and nail it down as a permanent family surname for every generation after. And subscribe to Blame Your Ancestors now, because here's where the mystery of the 7 names actually gets solved, and it is stranger than you think. Because think about what happens when you freeze a system built on first names. At the moment the name's locked, most Welsh surnames simply became the first name of whatever father happened to be alive when the freezing happened. And there were 2 ways it was done. The first, and by far the most common, was to take the father's first name and add an English S to the end of it, meaning son of. So the son of a man named John became Jones. The son of a William became Williams. The son of a David, or Dafydd, became Davies. The son of an Evan became Evans. The son of a Robert, Roberts. The son of a Hugh, Hughes. The son of a Grufford, Griffiths. And that is the entire secret of why Wales drowns in the same few names. These were not rare or noble names. They were the most ordinary first names a Welsh father could have, the John, the William, the David, repeated in every parish in the land. When you freeze the most common first names in the country and turn them into permanent surnames all at once, you do not get variety. You get a whole nation of Joneses and Williamses and Davieses, unrelated families who simply happen to share the same ordinary father's names at the same moment in history. And this is the part that genealogists will beg you to understand. 2 people named Jones, even 2 born in the very same village, are very often not related at all. Their surname does not point back to one shared ancestor. It points back to the fact that both of their families, separately, had a father named John at the moment the names froze. The surname Jones is not a family. It is a coincidence that happened to millions of people at once. This is why tracing Welsh ancestry is famously one of the hardest tasks in all of genealogy. You go looking for your Jones ancestor in the parish records and you find not one but a dozen John Joneses of the right age in the same district, and there is no way from the name alone to tell which thread is yours. Now, before we go further, let me kill an exaggeration, because the loud version of this story is wrong and the correction is a credibility badge. People love to say every Welshman is a Jones. He is not. Even at the height of it, Jones accounted for well under 1 in 5 people in Wales. It is the single most common name, yes, but it never swallowed the country whole. The real story is not that everyone is a Jones. It is that a tiny handful of names, 10 or so, divide most of the nation between them, and that is somehow stranger and more specific than the lazy joke. But the S on the end of the name was only one of the two methods, and the second one is where your surname might be hiding a secret in plain sight. Because some families, when they froze their names, did not drop the old Welsh system. They kept a piece of it. They took that ancient word ap, son of, and they fused it directly onto the front of the father's name, jamming the two together until the join almost disappeared. And the result is a whole category of Welsh surnames that are carrying a compressed, hidden ap right at the start, and almost nobody who bears them realizes it. Watch how it works, because once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Ap Hywel, son of Hywel, said quickly, collapses into Powell. That P at the front of Powell is not a P at all. It is the ghost of the word ap. Ap Rees, son of Rees, becomes Price. That is why Price begins with that hard P sound. It is Ap Rees crushed into a single word. Ap Hugh becomes Pew. Ap Richard, using the Welsh Ricciard, becomes Pritchard. Ap Harry becomes Perry. And when the word was the softer ab before a vowel, you get a B instead. Ab Owen becomes Bowen. Ab Evan becomes Bevan, the name of the very man who later founded the British Health Service. Ab Robert becomes Probert. So if your surname is Price, or Powell, or Pugh, or Perry, or Pritchard, or Bowen, or Bevan, you are not carrying an English-style name at all. You are carrying the old Welsh chain, frozen in the act of naming your ancestor's father, with that little word for son fossilized into the first letter of your name. Say it in the comments if your name begins with that hidden ap, because you are wearing a piece of medieval Welsh grammar every day of your life without knowing it. And there is a cruel accident of history that made the whole thing even worse, that squeezed the names even tighter. At almost exactly the time the surnames were freezing, the Protestant Reformation swept through, and it changed which first names Welsh parents used. The old, wild variety of Welsh baptismal names began to fade, and parents increasingly reached for a small set of respectable, biblical, approved names. John, David, Thomas, William. So, at the very moment when the country was locking its first names into permanent surnames, the pool of first names available was itself shrinking down to a handful. Two forces pressing at once, a naming system being frozen, and the thing being frozen growing smaller by the year. It was a perfect storm for producing a nation where everyone shares the same 7 or 8 names. So how did anyone tell each other apart? Imagine a single valley with 200 families, and a third of them named Jones, half the men called John or David. The parish is full of men who are, on paper, the exact same person. John Jones and another John Jones. And the Welsh solved it the only way they could, with nicknames, and they turned it into an art form. A man was not just John Jones. He was John Jones the Post, for the postman, or Jones the Milk, or Die the Death for the Undertaker, or Jones Top Shop and Jones Bottom Shop for 2 men who ran different ends of the same street. The nickname carried the information the surname had stopped carrying. And among the more respectable classes, another fix appeared in the 1800s. They began stitching a second name onto the front of the family name, very often the mother's maiden name, to tell one branch of Joneses from another. That is where the grand double-barreled Welsh surnames come from. It was not aristocratic pretension. It was survival, a desperate attempt to claw back a scrap of the individuality that the Great Freezing had stripped away. And here is the thread that ties it back to the oldest Wales of all. The Great Surname Freeze did not happen everywhere at once. It began with the gentry, the landowners, the families closest to the English administration, the ones who needed to sign English documents and hold English-recognized title to their land. It spread first through the towns and along the English border, where English pressure was heaviest. But out in the west, in the rural heartlands, in the hills and the remote valleys where English clerks rarely reached, the old living system of AP and Furch survived far longer. In parts of rural Wales, people were still naming themselves the ancient way, son of, daughter of, right into the early 1800s, nearly 3 centuries after Henry VIII first tried to freeze them. The further you were from England, the longer your name stayed alive. The oldest way of being Welsh held out longest exactly where Wales was most itself. So the next time you meet a Jones, or a Williams, or a Davies, you will know you are not looking at a family name in the way an English Smith or a French Dubois is a family name. You are looking at the fossil of a single ordinary father, a John or a William or a David, who happened to be standing at the end of the chain at the exact moment the English state reached in and froze it. And if the name is a Price or a Powell or a Bowen, you are looking at something even older, the ancient Welsh word for son, ap, still clinging to the front of the name 5 centuries later, refusing to be fully erased. Every one of these names is a small monument to the moment a living, flowing, 1,000-year-old way of naming a person was stopped in its tracks and pinned to the page. The Welsh did not choose to have the same 7 names. It was done to them, and they carried the evidence of it quietly in their own names ever since. So tell me your name and tell me where in Wales your people come from. If you are a Jones or a Williams or an Evans, say it and say which county, because I want to see whether the map of the comments looks like the map of Wales itself. If your name hides the old app, if you are a Price or a Powell or a Pugh or a Perry or a Bowen, say that especially because you are carrying the oldest layer of all. The son of that survived the freezing. And if your family held on to the patronymic longer than most, if there is a Furch or an app anywhere back in your line, tell me where they were, because I would bet money they were out in the west, far from the reach of the clerks. For 1,000 years the Welsh carried their fathers in their names, a living chain that changed with every birth. It took an empire to stop it, and even then it did not fully succeed, because the evidence is still sitting there, in the Powells and the Prices and the Bevans, and every hidden app that never quite got erased. Next time, we follow one of these names out of the valleys and see where in the world it ended up.